was alone until I heard a second set of footsteps echoing mine in the tunnel. You're listening to ASMR 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So this happened last fall when I drove up to the Spruce Railroad Trailhead. On the north shore of Lake Crescent in Olympic National Park, it was October 29th, a Saturday. I remember pulling into the gravel parking lot right around 2:37 in the afternoon because I glanced at the clock on my dash and thought to myself, I've got a good 3-4 hours of daylight left, plenty of time to do the out. And back to the Devil's Punch Bowl, and back the sky was that kind of low heavy gray that just sucks all the color out of the world like a black and white photo. Everything was so still, so quiet, not even a breeze coming off the lake, which was like a sheet of polished slate, just sitting there between these huge steep tree-covered ridges. I had the whole place to myself, which wasn't that weird for a late October afternoon. But it felt different this time. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I remember getting out of my Jeep, the crunch of my boots on the gravel, sounding way too loud like a gunshot in that silence, and I remember the air, it was cold, but damp to the kind that gets right into your bones and just sits there festering. I slung my day pack over my shoulder. It had the usual stuff, some water, a flashlight, a power bar, my knife, just the basics, and I started down the trail, which is this old converted railroad bed, so it's wide and flat, really easy walking, the kind of trail you don't even have to think about, just put one foot in front of the other and enjoy the views of the lake through the trees. The maples and alders were all bare, their skinny black branches looking like cracks in the sky, and the big Douglas firs and hemlocks were just dark green walls on either side of me. The trail curved along the shoreline. I could hear the water lapping gently against the rocks down below. It was a peaceful sound, the only sound really besides my own breathing. My footsteps on the packed dirt. I remember thinking, man, I needed this just to get out of the city, to be alone with my thoughts for a few hours. But that feeling of being watched, that prickling on the back of my neck, started almost immediately, which was stupid because, like I said, I was completely alone. I stopped a couple times and turned around expecting to see another hiker or maybe a deer, but there was never anything there, just the empty trail stretching back into the gloom. The second time I stopped, I swore I heard something else, a faint rustling in the dry leaves off to my left, just beyond the tree line. I stood there for a full minute, not breathing, just listening, and it came again. But it didn't sound like an animal. It sounded slower, more deliberate, like someone was dragging a stick through the leaf litter, taking one slow step at a time. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice sounded small and then swallowed up by the trees. Almost instantly there was no answer, but the rustling stopped and the silence that came back was even heavier than before. I shook it off, told myself it was just a squirrel or a bird, and kept walking, trying to focus on the beauty of the place, the way the light was hitting the water. But that feeling of being watched just intensified. With every step, it was like the trees themselves had eyes, and they were all fixed on me. I finally reached the first tunnel, the one they call the McPhee Tunnel. It's this short rock tunnel that the railroad used to go through, and it's always dark and damp inside. Even on a bright day, I pulled out my flashlight before I stepped in. Not because I was scared of the dark, but because the footing can be tricky with puddles and loose rocks. The beam of my light cut through the darkness, and I could see the curved walls covered in graffiti, and the tunnel wasn't that long. Maybe 100 feet, so I could see the light at the other end. I started walking, my footsteps echoing now, bouncing off the walls, and that's when I heard the second set of footsteps. They were faint at first, just a soft scuffing sound behind me. I stopped to listen, and they stopped too. I thought it was just an echo. So I took another 2 steps, and there it was, 2 more steps from behind me, but they weren't an echo. They were a fraction of a second later, like someone was matching my pace, exactly staying just far enough back to be hidden in the darkness. I spun around, shining my light back the way I came, the beam shaking a little in my hand. But the tunnel was empty, just the puddles and the graffiti and the circle of daylight. At the entranceway behind me, I stood there for what felt like an hour, my heart hammering in my chest, listening, but there was nothing, no sound at all. I told myself it was my imagination, it was the water dripping or the wind, except there was no wind. I finally turned back around and practically ran for the far end of the tunnel, bursting out into the gray afternoon light, and I didn't stop walking until I was a good 50 yards down the trail, my breath coming in short white puffs in the cold air. I didn't hear the footsteps again, but I also didn't stop to look back. I just kept my eyes forward, fixed on the path ahead, trying to convince myself that I was just spooking myself out, that it was almost Halloween, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But a deep down part of me knew that something was wrong, that the silence of the forest wasn't peaceful anymore. It was predatory, and I was walking right into the middle of it. I kept walking, trying to shake off the creepy feeling from the tunnel, just putting one foot in front of the other and focusing on the rhythm of my breathing. The trail here follows the lake even closer, and in some spots you're right on the edge, looking down into water that's so deep it's practically black. They say the lake is over 1,000 feet deep in places, and that there are whole towns down there, submerged forests, and who knows what else. I tried not to think about that, tried not to think about how the water looked like a solid thing, like you could step out onto it. It would hold your weight. The second tunnel was coming up, the daily Rankin tunnel. That's longer and darker than the first one, and I really did not want to go through it, but the trail doesn't have a bypass. You either go through or you turn back. I wasn't about to turn back, not after just one little scare. I'm not that guy. I'm not the guy who gets spooked by an echo and runs home with his tail between his legs. So I squared my shoulders and got my flashlight ready again. As I approached the entrance, this one was like a black mouth, just open wide, waiting to swallow me. Oh, the air around it was even colder, a good 10 degrees colder than it was on the trail, and I could see my breath pluming out in front of me. In thick white clouds, I paused at the entrance, shining my light inside. The beam didn't seem as bright as before. It seemed to struggle against the darkness, only illuminating a few feet ahead. The walls in here were rougher, less graffiti, and more of that dark, damp rock that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, and the cold hit me like a physical wall. It was damp and it smelled wrong, not like wet rock and earth, but like something else, something metallic and old, like the smell of a handful of pennies or blood. that's been left out to dry. I started walking faster now. I didn't care about puddles or loose rocks. I just wanted to get through this tunnel as quickly as possible. My footsteps were loud in the confined space, and I was hyper-aware of every sound. Every drip of water, every shift of gravel under my boots. About halfway through, the light from the entrance behind me was just a distant memory, and the light ahead wasn't visible yet. So I was in the deepest, darkest part, and that's when I heard the breathing. It wasn't my breathing, mine was shallow and quick. This was something. It was a low, raspy sound like air being dragged through a clogged pipe. It was coming from behind me. It was close to close. I froze, my whole body going rigid with fear. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see what was making that sound, but I had to know. I slowly turned my head, shining the flashlight back. The way I came, the beam cut through the dark, and for a split second I saw something. I saw a shape hunched over and low to the ground just at the very edge of my light. It was man-shaped, but wrong. Its limbs were too long. It seemed to be moving in a jerky, unnatural way. Its eyes that reflected the light back at me, not like an animal's eyes, but like the flat discs of old glass. And then it was gone. It just melted back into the darkness the way a shadow disappears when you turn on a light. The raspy breathing stopped too, and the tunnel was silent again, except for the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. I didn't wait, I didn't think, I just ran. I ran like hell, stumbling through puddles, my backpack slamming against my back, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly all over the walls. I didn't look back. I just ran towards the pinprick of light that was the other end of the tunnel. It seemed to take forever, my lungs burning with the cold, damp air. But finally I burst out into the open air again, and I didn't stop running until I was 100 yards down the trail. I finally collapsed against a big cedar tree, my chest heaving, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight. I bent over, putting my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of but I had seen. It was just a trick of the light. I told myself it was a shadow from my own flashlight, and my mind filled in the rest because I was scared. That's all it was. It had to be. I stayed there for a long time, just listening to the forest. But it was dead silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. It was like someone had put the whole world on mute. I looked back at the tunnel entrance. It was just a dark hole in the side of the mountain, nothing coming out. But I knew I couldn't go back that way. There was no way. I was going back through that tunnel, which meant my only way out was to keep going forward, finish the hike to the punch bowl, and then hopefully find another way out, or just wait until morning. I wasn't thinking straight. I know that now, but at the time it made sense to just keep moving, to put a distance between me and that tunnel. So I started walking again, my pace slower now, more cautious. Jumpy, flinching at every little sound, my eyes constantly scanning the trees. On either side of the trail, the feeling of being watched was back, and it was stronger than ever. It felt like whatever was in that tunnel was now out here with me. It was following me just out of sight, keeping pace with me in the woods. I pulled my knife out of my pack, just a little folding knife, but holding it made me feel a little better, a little less helpless. The trail began to curve away from the lake and head slightly uphill into a denser part of the forest. The trees were bigger here, older, and they crowded in closer close to the trail there, branches weaving together overhead to form a tunnel of their own, blocking out most of the gray sky. It felt like I was walking into a cave. The light was fading fast now, the afternoon slipping away, and the air was getting even colder. I checked my phone for the time, but there was no service, not even a flicker, and the time display was frozen on 3:18 p.m., which was impossible, because it had been at least an hour since I left the second tunnel. I shook my phone, tapped the screen, but it was dead cold and unresponsive, a brick of glass and metal in my hand. That's when I noticed the first marker, or the lack of them, the Spruce Railroad Trail. As these little mile marker signs on posts every half mile or so, but I realized I hadn't seen one in a long time. I should have passed at least two since the tunnel. But there was nothing, just trees and more trees, and the trail itself was changing. It was getting narrower, the gravel surface giving way to hard-packed dirt, and roots wasn't being maintained anymore, like I'd wandered onto a different path. But that was impossible. The trail is straight. There are no turnoffs, no side paths. Just stay on the main trail. I stopped again, listening. I could hear something, but had a faint sound like whispering. It was too low to make out any words, but it had a rhythm to it, like a chant or a prayer. It was coming from just around the next bend. In the trail, my grip tightened on the knife, and I moved forward slowly, carefully pressing myself against the trunk of a big fir tree and peering around the bend. But I saw that made my blood run cold. It was a doll, a child's doll, made of cracked and faded porcelain. It was sitting propped up against a tree right on the edge of the trail. Its head was turned, and its painted blue eyes were looking right at me. It was dressed in a little lace dress that was stained with dark patches that looked like mud, or maybe something else, and it had one hand raised, pointing down the trail the way I was going. The whispering sound seemed to be coming from it, a low sibilant hiss that wormed its way into my ears. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to run back the way I came, but the thought of those tunnels, of that thing in the darkness, was worse than this creepy doll, so I did the only thing I could think to do. I stepped out from behind the tree and kept walking, giving the doll a wide berth. As I passed it, its head turned slowly, tracking me, its eyes never leaving mine, and the whispering got louder. I could almost make out words now. It sounded like it was saying, "Come home" or "Go home." I couldn't tell. I didn't stop to find out. I just walked faster and faster until I was past it, and when I dared to look back, the doll was gone and the whispering had stopped. But the pointing hand was now lying in the middle of the trail, fingers broken off, as if it had been crushed by something big and heavy. The forest after the doll felt different, like I had crossed some kind of invisible line. The air was so thick and cold it was hard to breathe, like I was walking through soup. The trees were pressing in so close, their branches scraping against my arms and snagging on my backpack like they were trying to grab me to slow me down. The trail was almost gone now, just a faint path of trampled leaves and pine needles winding between the massive trunks. I knew I was lost. I had to be lost, because the Spruce Railroad Trail is wide and clear, and this was neither, but I couldn't figure out how I had gotten off it. There was no turn, no fork in the road. I'd just been walking straight the whole time. My mind was racing, trying to latch onto something logical. Maybe a landslide had wiped out the trail, and this was a detour I hadn't noticed. But that didn't make sense either. The light was fading fast, the gray twilight deepening into a murky premature night, and I knew I needed to find a place to stop, to hunker down and wait for morning, because there was no way. I was finding my way out in the dark. I started looking for a spot of fallen log to hide behind a thicket. Anything but the woods here were just a uniform wall of dark trunks and grasping branches. I pulled out my flashlight again and clicked it on. The beam was weak and yellow now, the batteries clearly dying. It barely cut through the gloom more than a few feet. I shook it and it flickered, and for a second the beam jumped ahead and illuminated something in the distance, not trees, but a structure, a shape that was too straight to square to be natural. I moved towards it, my heart leaping with a desperate hope that it was a ranger station or a trail shelter, something man-made, something safe. As I got closer, the beam revealed it was a small cabin made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. It looked ancient. The roof sagged in the middle, and the single window was just a dark, empty square. No glass. The door was ajar, hanging crookedly on one leather hinge. The clearing around it was overgrown with brambles and young saplings, like the forest was trying to reclaim it. It didn't look like any Park Service building I'd ever seen. It looked old, pioneer, old from a century ago, but it was shelter. It was walls and a roof. It was the only option I had, so I pushed my way through the brambles, ignoring the thorns tearing at my jeans, and I approached the door. The whispering started again, but this time it wasn't coming from one place. It was all around me, a soft chorus of voices, just on the edge of hearing, all whispering the same phrase over and over. You're home. Now you're home, now you're home, now. I pushed the heavy door open and scraped across the dirt floor with a sound that set my teeth on edge. The inside of the cabin was one room, and it was freezing colder than it was outside. If that was even possible, the air was stale and thick with the smell of dust and old wood smoke, and that same metallic blood smell from the tunnel. There was a crude wooden table against one wall with a single chair, a rusted cast iron stove in the corner. In the center of the room, a rocking chair, and it was rocking back and forth slowly, gently, all on its own, like someone had just gotten up from it. The motion was smooth and steady. Creak, creak, creak. I shone my light around the room, the beam dancing over the walls. And that's when I saw the pictures. They were everywhere, nailed to the log walls, not photographs, but drawings done in charcoal, or maybe ash on pieces of torn bark and flat stones. They were drawings of me. One showed me getting out of my Jeep, the crunch of the gravel captured in frantic, shaky lines. Another showed me standing at the entrance to the first tunnel, my face a pale circle of fear. There was one of me running from the second tunnel, my mouth open in a silent scream. One of me looking at the doll, its porcelain face rendered in terrifying detail. Every picture was a moment from my hike. Today they were all there, documented by some unseen artist, and they were all watching me, the eyes in the drawings. Following the beam of my flashlight, I backed away towards the door, my breath catching in my throat, but the door was gone where the door should have been there. It's just a solid log wall. I spun around, shining my light wildly. The only exit was gone. I was trapped in here. The rocking chair kept rocking. Creak, 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 and then a new sound started, a soft scratching sound coming from the ceiling. I looked up, and my dying light illuminated the rafters, and they were filled with dolls, dozens of them. Hundreds of them porcelain dolls and corn husk dolls and dolls made of sticks and mud, all crammed into the space between the ceiling and the roof. Their heads turned down, their painted eyes fixed on me, and their little hands were scratching, scraping at the wood of the ceiling like they were trying to get down, like they wanted to join me. The whispering grew louder, coming from all around me. From the dolls above, from the drawings on the walls, it was inside my head. You're home now. You're home now, you're home now. I stumbled backwards away from the center of the room, my back hitting the wall, and a cloud of dust showered down on me. The scratching from above grew more frantic. I could see little chips of wood falling with the dust. As their tiny fingers clawed at the beams, I slid down the wall to the floor, pulling my knees up to my chest and covering my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The whispering was coming from inside me now, a part of my own thoughts. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the cabin into absolute darkness. The only sounds were the creaking of the rocking chair, the relentless scratching from above, and the chorus of whispers welcoming me home. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, curled into a ball, but eventually the scratching stopped and the rocking chair fell silent. The only thing left was the whispering, a soft, constant sibilance in the darkness, and then a new sound, a faint tapping coming from the window. I looked up, and in the dim moonlight that filtered through the empty window frame, I saw a face. It was pale, gone, its features stretched and thin, but I recognized that it was my own face. My own eyes staring back at me from outside, but they were wrong. They were empty and black, and the mouth was moving in time with the whispers, you're home now, and then it was gone. Must have passed out from sheer exhaustion or terror, because the next thing I knew, a weak gray light was filtering through the cabin's single window. The whispering had stopped, the scratching was gone, the cabin was silent, and most importantly, the door was back. It was hanging open just as I had left it. The drawings were still on the walls, but they seemed faded, less defined, like someone had tried to wipe them away. The dolls and the rafters were gone, to not a single one remained. I didn't waste any time. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles stiff and aching from the cold, from sleeping on the hard dirt floor. I didn't look back, I just bolted for the door. Bursting out into the early morning light, the air was still cold, but it didn't. That same oppressive weight to it. The forest looked almost normal again. Trees just traced the trail, a faint path leading away from the cabin. I started walking. My only thought was to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. I didn't care about direction. I just followed the path. It had to lead somewhere eventually. The events of the night before felt like a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and cold, but the memory was too sharp, too visceral to dismiss. That thing with my face at the window, I shuddered and kept walking. The trail began to widen a little, and the forest started to look more familiar after about an hour of walking. I saw something up ahead that made my heart leap. It was a mile marker. Post a number for carved into it. I was back on the Spruce Railroad Trail. Relief flooded through me, so intense it made me dizzy. I was going to be okay. I was on the right path. All I had to do was follow it back to the parking lot, to my Jeep. I could almost taste the hot coffee I was going to get in Port Angeles. I picked up my pace, practically jogging now. The lake came back into view through the trees. Its surface calm and gray and beautiful, nothing sinister about it at all. The second tunnel. The daily ranking was up ahead, and I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach, but I had no choice. It was the only way back. I approached it slowly, my hand going to my pocket for my flashlight. Before remembering it was dead, I'd have to go through. In the dark, I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The tunnel was just as cold and damp as before, but it felt different, emptier. The malevolent presence from yesterday was gone, or at least it was hiding. I moved quickly, my hands out in front of me to avoid bumping into the walls. My eyes straining to adjust to the absolute blackness. Halfway through, I saw the circle of light. That was the other end, and I focused on it like a lifeline. Was almost there, almost out, when my foot kicked something small and hard, sending it skittering across the rocky floor. I froze, listening, but there was no sound. I took another step, and my foot landed on something that crunched under my weight. I looked down, even though I couldn't see anything, and I knew what it was. I could feel it through the sole of my boot, the fragments of porcelain. I had stepped on the doll from the trail. I didn't need light to know it was her. I started to run again, stumbling through the darkness until I burst out into the daylight on the other side. I didn't stop. I kept running past the first tunnel. Without a second glance, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I just ran until I saw the gravel parking lot up ahead and my Jeep sitting there all alone. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the lock. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, locking it immediately. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, staring out at the trailhead, expecting something to come out of the woods after me. But nothing did. The forest was quiet, peaceful. Even I started the engine, the roar of it sounding alien and loud after the silence of the woods. I put it in drive and spun the tires on the gravel, getting out of there as fast as I could. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, not once. I just drove. I hit the main road and headed towards Port Angeles, towards people and cell service and normalcy. It was about 5 miles down the road when I started to feel like myself again. The fear began to recede, replaced by a shaky relief. I had made it out. I was okay. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, to tell them I was okay, but it was still dead cold and unresponsive. I plugged it into the car charger and waited a few minutes, but nothing happened. The screen remained black. A thought occurred to me, a cold trickle of dread down my spine. I glanced in the rearview mirror for the first time, and I almost drove off the road. The reflection staring back at me wasn't mine. The face was pale and gaunt. The eyes were empty and black, and the mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural smile. It was the thing from the cabin window. It was wearing my clothes. It was in my car. It was me, but it wasn't. I screamed and slammed on the brakes. Swerving onto the shoulder, the car skidded to a halt. I scrambled away from the mirror, pressing myself against the driver's side door, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I looked at the mirror again, but it was just me, my own terrified face staring back, sweat soaked and wide-eyed, but mine. I took a deep breath, letting out a shaky laugh. It was just my mind playing tricks on me again. Stress and exhaustion. I had to get a grip. I put the car back in drive and continued on my way, but I couldn't shake the image of that other face in the mirror. It had felt so real I kept checking the mirror every few seconds, but it was always just me. The road into Port Angeles winds through a dense stretch of forest, and as I drove, I started to notice things, little things. At first, a group of crows sitting on a fence post. Them turned, watching me drive past their heads, moving in unison to track the car further down the road. I saw a deer standing at the tree line, but it wasn't acting right. It was standing on its hind legs, its front legs dangling limply at its sides. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle. It was smiling, a wide, toothy grin that no deer should ever have. I pressed the accelerator harder, wanting to get to town. Now the trees began to thin. I could see the outskirts of Port Angeles up ahead, the gas stations, the fast food places. Civilization, I almost cried with relief. I pulled into the first gas station. I saw my hands still trembling as I shut off the engine. I needed to use a phone. I needed to talk to a real person. I got out of the car. The bell on the door jangled as I walked into the convenience store. The clerk, a kid with acne and a beanie, looked up from his phone. "Can I help you?" he said. His voice was flat, bored. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask to use the phone, but the words died in my throat. I was staring at the magazine rack next to the counter. Every magazine, every newspaper, every cover had my face on it. Not a photograph, but one of those charcoal drawings from the cabin, my face contorted in fear. On the cover of Time magazine, on People, on the local newspaper, the headlines were all the same: "Lost hiker returns home," or "The man who walked too far." The clerk was still looking at me, waiting for me to speak. I turned to him, and his eyes were wrong. His pupils were too big, black and glassy, just like the thing in the tunnel, and he was smiling, a small, knowing smile. "You're home now," he said, his voice not his own, but a chorus of whispers layered together. I backed out of the store, stumbling over my own feet. I got back in my Jeep and peeled out of the parking lot, heading into the main part of town. Surely someone would help me, surely. This was just some localized madness, some bad dream, but it was the same everywhere. I drove. People on the sidewalks turned to watch me pass, their movements jerky and synchronized like marionettes, their faces all wearing the same serene smile. Every billboard, every store window had my face on it. Those damn drawings. I was everywhere. I was famous for all the wrong reasons. I finally saw a police car parked outside a diner. I swerved over and jumped out, running towards it. An officer was sitting in the driver's seat eating a donut. I tapped on the window. He rolled it down, looking annoyed. "Can I help you, son?" he said, and for a glorious second, he looked normal. His eyes were his own. His face was stern and real. I started to explain, stumbling over my words, telling him about the trail, the tunnels, the cabin, the dolls. He listened patiently, nodding along, and then he held up a hand to stop me. He said, "We know all about it, son. We've been waiting for you." And then he smiled, his mouth stretching too wide, too many teeth, and his eyes flooded with blackness. And he said in that same whispering chorus, "Welcome home." I ran back to my Jeep. I drove out of town. I drove south. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, just trying to escape. But no matter where I went, it was the same. The signs had my face. People smiled with black eyes and whispered their welcome. I drove until the gas light came on and I had to stop. I pulled into a lonely gas station. In the middle of nowhere, a place I'd never been before, I prepaid at the pump with my credit card. Not wanting to talk to anyone, I stood there watching. The numbers tick up and the pump clicked off. I pulled the nozzle out, and as I was putting it back, I looked up at the small screen on the pump. It usually shows ads or the news, but it was showing a live feed from a security camera, and it was a shot of my back from behind as I stood there pumping gas. And then the view changed. It zoomed in, panning around to show my face, and text scrolled across the bottom of the screen. He's home. Left the gas nozzle hanging from the side of my Jeep, and I just got in. Drove away, the smell of unleaded fuel filling the car because I hadn't even put the cap back on. I didn't care. I had to get away from that screen, from those words. I drove south on the 101 with no destination in mind, just putting miles between me and that gas station, between me and Port Angeles, between me and the trailhead. But the deeper I drove into the peninsula, the worse it got. The forests on either side of the highway seemed to lean in closer, the trees looking more and more like the twisted sentinels from my hike. The sky was that same uniform gray, like a lid had been clamped down over the world. I passed a few other cars, and every single time I looked over, the drivers and passengers would all be turned towards me, their faces pale and smiling, their eyes dark pools, and they would raise a hand in unison, not a wave, but a slow, deliberate gesture of acknowledgement. I stopped looking at other cars. I just stared straight ahead at the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. My phone was still dead on the passenger seat. I grabbed it and tried to turn it on again. Nothing. I threw it against the dashboard in frustration, and it clattered to the floor mat, and that's when I saw the writing etched into the back of the phone. It must have been done with a knife or a sharp rock. The letters were crude and deep scratched into the plastic. It said, "Stay on the path." I didn't understand what path they meant. The trail was miles behind me. I was on a highway. I kept driving. The gas gauge was dropping again. I needed to find another station, but the thought of stopping, of interacting with anyone, made me feel physically sick. I saw a sign for a small town called Amanda Park coming up. It had a gas symbol on it, so I took the exit. The town was just a blink and you miss it collection of houses. General store with two old-fashioned gas pumps out front. I pulled up to the pumps and turned off the car. I sat there for a minute just watching the store through the windshield. The windows were dark and I didn't see anyone moving inside. Maybe it was closed. Maybe I could just pump the gas and go without talking to anyone. I got out and approached the pumps. They were the kind you have to prepay inside, of course. I looked towards the store and the door opened. An old man stepped out. He was wearing overalls and a flannel shirt, and he had a kind wrinkled face. For a wild moment I felt hope. Maybe here, maybe in this tiny town. It hadn't reached yet. He walked towards me a step slow and measured. "You need gas, son?" he asked. His voice was raspy, but normal sounding. "Yes, sir," I said. "Just fill it up. Regular is fine." He nodded and started to work on the pump. I stood there watching him. He didn't look at me. He just focused on his task. His hands were gnarled and weathered with age. When he finished, he turned to me. "That'll be $42, he said. I reached for my wallet and pulled out my credit card. He shook his head. "Sorry, son, machine's down, cash only." I sighed and opened my wallet. I had 2 20s and a 5. I handed him the 2 20s. He took them and folded them carefully, putting them in his overalls pocket. Then he looked at me for the first time. His eyes were clear and blue and blessedly normal. You look like you've seen a ghost, son, he said. You okay? I almost broke down right then and there. I almost told him everything, but the words stuck in my throat. I just nodded. I'm okay, just a long night. He studied my face for a moment, and then he said, you're the one from the news, ain't you? My blood ran cold. The news? What news? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded towards the story. Yeah, on the radio they've been talking about you all morning. Hiker gone missing up on Lake Crescent. They found your car, but not you. They think you might have fell in the lake. It's real deep there. You know they never find the bodies sometimes. He said this all so casually, like he was talking about the weather. I just stared at him. They found my car, but I'm right here, I said. He smiled, a gentle grandfatherly smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure you are, son, sure you are, but you should probably get going now. Storm's coming. He turned and walked back towards the store. As he did, I saw the back of his overalls. They were stained with a dark patch that looked like mud, but as he moved, the fabric shifted and I saw it wasn't mud. It was a picture drawn in something brown and rusty. It was a picture of me standing right here at this gas pump, drawn in the same style as the ones in the cabin. He disappeared inside the store, and I stood there frozen for a second before jumping back into my Jeep. I started the engine and pulled away faster than I should have, spraying gravel behind me. I looked in the rearview mirror, and the old man was standing in the doorway of the store watching me leave, and he wasn't alone. Standing in the shadows behind him were dozens of pairs of glowing reflective eyes, and the dolls from the cabin were clustered around his feet, their porcelain faces turned towards me. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and didn't look back. The radio, I thought maybe the radio would have something. I turned it on, and static blasted from the speakers. I fumbled with the dial, trying to find a station, any station. But there was nothing, just hissing white noise, and then a voice broke through the static. It was my voice, but distorted, slowed down, and full of pain. It just said one word over and over, home, 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 home. I turned the radio off, my heart hammering in my chest. The highway began to climb into the hills, the trees crowding, and again the sky darkening as if a storm really was coming. The road was deserted now. No other cars, just me and the forest and whatever was following me. I saw a sign for Lake Quinault. I remembered that there was a lodge there, a big, old, historic lodge with people and phones and maybe safety. It was a place to go, a destination. I pushed on the road, winding higher and higher. The fog began to roll in thick tendrils of white mist that snaked across the road, reducing visibility to almost nothing. I had to slow down to a crawl, my high beams reflecting back off the fog, creating a solid wall of white in front of me. It was like driving through milk. I could barely see the road, and then I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road up ahead. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the damp asphalt. The figure was a woman. She was wearing a long white dress that was torn and dirty. Her hair was stringy and wet, and she had her back to me as I skidded to a stop just a few feet from her. She slowly turned around, and it was me again, my face but gaunt and terrified. Her mouth was moving like she was trying to scream, but no sound was coming out. And then she pointed a trembling finger at me, and her eyes were wide with fear, and She mouthed one word, "run," and then the fog swirled around her, and she was gone. I sat there shaking, my hands glued to the steering wheel. What was that, a warning? Was she trying to help me, or was it just another trick, another part of the nightmare? I put the car in drive and moved forward slowly, peering into the fog, expecting to see her again. But there was nothing. The road began to descend and the fog started to thin. I could see the lights of the Lake Quinault Lodge up ahead, nestled among the giant fir trees. It was a beautiful sight, a beacon of normality. The parking lot was full of cars, families unloading suitcases, couples walking hand in hand towards the main building. It looked so real, so solid. I pulled into a parking spot and turned off the engine. I just sat there for a few minutes watching people. They looked normal. They acted normal. No one was staring at me. No one was smiling a creepy smile. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. The air was fresh and clean, smelling of rain and pine. I walked towards the main entrance, my steps feeling heavy with exhaustion. I just needed to get inside, to a phone, to a person who could help me. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the lobby. It was exactly as I remembered it from a childhood trip with my parents, a massive stone fireplace, crackling with a real fire, comfortable leather armchairs, the smell of coffee and wood smoke. It was bustling with people checking and lugging bags, laughing. It was so normal it made me want to cry. I made my way to the front desk, a woman with a name tag that said Brenda, and a friendly smile looked up. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice warm and professional. "I need to use a phone," I said, my voice cracking. "Please, there's been an emergency, of course," she said, pushing a cordless phone across the counter to me. "Is everything all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," I said, grabbing the phone. "I need to call the police." I dialed 911 and held the phone to my ear. It rang once and then a familiar, raspy, whispering voice came on the line. "You're home now," it said. And then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief. No, this can't be happening. Brenda was still looking at me with concern. "Sir," she said, "are you sure you're okay? You look like you've seen it. You look familiar." We met before. I dropped the phone on the counter and backed away from her. "No," I muttered, "no. Just leaving." As I turned, I bumped into a man in a suit. "Sorry," I mumbled without looking up, and then I froze. The man I had bumped into was me. He was wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase, and he looked healthy and well rested, and he smiled at me, a warm, genuine smile, and he said, "No problem, buddy, have a good one." And he walked towards the front desk and said, "Hi, Brenda, sorry I'm late for the conference call." Brenda smiled back at him and said, "No problem, Mr. Henderson. Your room is ready." I watched this interaction, my mind refusing to process it. Mr. Henderson. That was me, that was my name. I stood there rooted to the spot as my doppelganger took his key from Brenda and walked towards the stairs. He looked back at me once and his eyes were normal, but there was a glint in them, a knowing look. And then he was gone. I ran out of the lodge, back to my Jeep. I got in and locked the doors. I was hyperventilating, tears of frustration and terror streaming down my face. What was happening? Who was that thing? Why was it living my life? I looked down at the passenger seat and my dead phone was there. And there was new writing etched into the plastic. It said WHYR. You fighting IT, and outside the car the people walking through the parking lot, they had all stopped what they were doing, and they were all turned towards my every single one of them, men, women, children, all with my face, wearing the same peaceful smile, and they started walking towards the car, their steps in perfect unison, a crowd of them surrounding the Jeep, their hands coming up to press against the glass, their smiling faces peering in at me. And they all spoke at once in a soft whispering chorus that vibrated through the metal of the car. "You're home now, you're home now, you're home now," he screamed, and covered my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real, this isn't real, this isn't real." I kept chanting it to myself like a mantra or prayer. When I opened my eyes again, the parking lot was empty. Just a few normal-looking tourists heading into the lodge. No one was looking at me, no one was me. But me, I started the engine, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the key in the ignition. I reversed out of the spot and sped out of the parking lot. Not caring where I was going, just away I drove back towards the highway. Fog had returned thicker than ever, a solid white wall that my headlights couldn't penetrate. I was driving blind, my speedometer reading 20 miles an hour, but it felt like I was flying through a void. There were no road lines, no trees, no sky, just whiteness and the sound of my own ragged breathing. And then the whispers started again, not from outside, but from inside the car, a soft sibilant sound coming from the vents, from the speakers, from the very fabric of the seats. "You can't leave, you're already home, you belong to us now." The road beneath the tires changed from asphalt to gravel, the crunching sound loud and sudden. I hit the brakes and the Jeep skidded to a halt. Peered through the windshield, the fog was so dense I couldn't see more than a foot in front of the car. I didn't know where I was. I put the car in park and got out, my feet sinking into soft damp earth. The air was cold and still. It smelled familiar, of damp earth and rotten leaves and that coppery penny smell. I took a few steps forward, my hands out in front of me like a blind man, and my fingers brushed against rough bark a tree. I was back in the forest. The fog began to lift, not dissipating, but pulling back like a curtain, retreating to the edges of a clearing, and I saw where I was. I was standing in the clearing in front of the old cabin, the cabin from the night before. It looked exactly the same, sagging roof, crooked door, dark empty window. I hadn't driven south for hours. I had driven in a circle, or something had brought me back here. The Jeep was parked behind me, its engine ticking. As it cooled down, the driver's side door still hanging open, I was back at the beginning, or at the center of it all. The whispers were louder now, coming from the trees, from the cabin, from the ground itself, welcoming me back, scolding me for trying to leave. The door of the cabin creaked open slowly, inviting me, and I knew I couldn't go back in there. Wouldn't I turn to get back in the Jeep to try to drive away again? But the Jeep was gone. In its place was a large moss-covered rock. The fog closed in again, swallowing the rock, swallowing the cabin, swallowing everything, until all that was left was me and a narrow path leading away from the clearing into the dark trees. Path was familiar. It was the Spruce Railroad Trail, but different. Older. The gravel was gone, replaced by hard-packed dirt and roots. The path was the only thing visible. Everything else was pure white fog. I had no choice. There was nowhere else to go, so I started walking. The whispers followed me, keeping pace just out of sight. I could hear them rustling in the fog on either side of the path. The air grew colder with every step, and the light began to fade from the flat white of the fog to a deep twilight gray, the trees started to appear again there. Dark chunks materializing out of the mist, the path began to slope downward, and the sound of water lapping against rocks grew louder. I was heading back towards the lake, towards the tunnels. I didn't want to go there, but the path gave me no choice. It was the only solid thing in this world of mist. The fog pulled back completely. As I reached the shore of Lake Crescent, the water was perfectly calm, like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the dark gray sky. The second tunnel, the Daily Rankin tunnel, was right in front of me, its entrance a black maw. The path led directly into it. There was no way around. I stood there at the entrance, staring into the absolute darkness. I could feel the cold radiating from it, could smell that old blood. Smell, I knew what was in there waiting for me, the thing with the long limbs and the glassy eyes. I couldn't do it, I couldn't go back in there. I turned to run, to try to disappear into the fog. But the fog was gone now, replaced by a solid wall of trees that hadn't been there a second ago. Their branches woven together into an impenetrable thicket. The only way was forward into the tunnel. Voice spoke from the darkness inside the tunnel. It wasn't a whisper this time, it was clear and loud, and it was my voice. Come home, it said. We've been waiting for you, we've missed you. I took a step forward, then another, my feet moving on their own, drawn towards the voice. The darkness inside the tunnel seemed to shift and swirl, and then a figure stepped out into the light at the entrance. It was me, but not that terrified me from the gas station or the lodge. This version of me looked calm, peaceful. His eyes were still black and empty, but his face was relaxed. He was smiling. A genuine warm smile. He was wearing the same clothes I had on the day I started the hike. The same jacket, the same boots. Welcome back, he said. His voice was my voice, but smoother, more confident. You took the long way around, but that's okay. You're here now. I stared at him, my mind reeling. What are you? I whispered. He smiled wider. I'm you, the you that belongs here, the you that understands this is your home now. We've been trying to show you, trying to welcome you, but you kept fighting it. You kept running. He took a step towards me and I took a step back. No, this isn't my home. I have a home, an apartment, a job, a life. He laughed, a soft, gentle laugh that sounded exactly like me. That life is over. That world has already forgotten you. They think you're dead. They've moved on. This is your world now, our world. We're all here. We've all come home. He gestured behind him into the tunnel, and other figures began to emerge. From the darkness, dozens of them, men and women of all ages. They all had the same black eyes, the same peaceful smiles, and they were all me. Every single one of them. They fanned out around the first one, surrounding me. In a semicircle, their faces kind and welcoming were the same. We're all together. Here we don't have to be alone anymore, the first one said, reaching out a hand to me. Take my hand, come home. I looked at their faces, all my face, all smiling at me with a love, an acceptance I had never felt in my real life, and a part of me wanted to give, and a part of me was so tired of running, so tired of being scared. It would be so easy to just take his hand, to let go of the fear and the confusion, and just be with them, to be home. The first one nodded encouragingly, his hand still outstretched. Yes, he whispered, that's it, come home. I started to raise my hand, my fingers trembling. I was inches from touching his when a sound broke the silence, a real sound, a familiar sound. Crunch of gravel under tires. I turned my head and saw my Jeep parked on the trail right where it shouldn't be able to be. The driver's side door was open, and the radio was on, playing a static-filled classic rock station from Seattle. A voice from the real world, a voice that was tinny and distant but real. Them surrounding me all hissed in unison, their smiles faltering, their black eyes narrowing in anger. No, he said, the first one, his voice losing its smoothness, becoming a ragged whisper. You're so close, don't look away, this is your home. I looked from his angry face to the Jeep, a lifeline, a thread back to reality. I made a choice. I dropped my hand and I ran. I ducked under his outstretched arm and I sprinted for the Jeep. I could hear them behind me, their whispers turning into screams. Rage, their peaceful facade shattering. I dove into the driver's seat and slammed the door, locking it just as they reached the car. Their faces pressed against the windows, their hands clawing at the glass, their black eyes full of hate. I turned the key, the engine roared to life. I threw it into drive and slammed my foot on the accelerator. The Jeep lurched forward, hitting something with a sickening thud. I didn't look back, I just drove, following the trail somehow, the wheels finding purchase on the gravel path. I sped past the first tunnel, past the trailhead parking lot that was now empty, and back onto the main road. The forest fell away behind me. I was driving under a clear night sky full of stars. I drove for an hour before I dared to slow down. My heart was still pounding, but the road was normal, the signs were normal. The other cars were normal people driving their own cars with their own lives. I pulled over at a rest stop, my whole body trembling with adrenaline and relief I had gotten. The way I had broken free, I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, my own face pale and scared. But mine, my own eyes bloodshot, but my own. I was me again, I was out. I started to laugh, a shaky, hysterical laugh of pure relief. It was over, it had to be over. I got out of the car to get some air, to feel the solid ground under my feet. I walked towards the restroom building, my steps feeling light for the first time in days. I pushed open the door to the men's room and flipped on the light. The fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the white tiles and the row of sinks. In the mirror above the sinks and in the mirror, my reflection was already staring back at me, waiting. And it was smiling, its black eyes full of pity in it. Said, you didn't really think it was that easy, did ya? We stumbled backwards out of the restroom. Falling on the cold concrete, the door swung shut behind me, cutting off the view of that thing. In the mirror, my own face smiling that terrible smile. I scrambled to my feet and ran back to the Jeep, locking the doors again. My brief moment of hope shattered into a million pieces. It wasn't over, it would never be over. I was trapped in this nightmare and there was no waking up. I started the car and drove again with no destination, no plan, just motion. The night was clear and cold, the stars were sharp pinpricks in the black velvet sky. A normal, beautiful night that felt like a mockery of everything I was experiencing. I drove for hours until the sun began to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and orange. The light made me feel a little better, a little more grounded. The things that hunted me seemed to prefer the dark. Maybe the daylight would keep them at bay. I saw a sign for a small coastal town called Seabrook. It was a planned community, cute little houses and shops meant to look like a classic seaside village. It looked clean and safe. Most importantly, it was full of light. I decided to stop to try to find Helped to find someone who could see what was happening to me, I pulled over near a coffee shop. It was just opening its doors. The smell of fresh coffee was intoxicating, a smell from the real world. I walked in, a bell jingling above the door. A barista with bright blue hair and a nose ring looked up from wiping down the espresso machine. Morning, she said with a cheerful smile. What can I get started for you? I just stood there for a second, basking in her normality, her lack of black eyes, her genuine smile. Coffee, I said, my voice hoarse. Just a large black coffee. Sure thing, she said, turning to the machine. As she worked, I looked around the shop. It was empty, except for an old man reading a newspaper in the corner. Everything looked real solid. The coffee machine hissed and gurgled. The sound was comforting. The barista handed me a large paper cup. That's $3.50, she said. I reached for my wallet and pulled out a 20. She took it and went to the register to make change. She hummed to herself as she worked, and then she stopped humming. She was staring at the register screen. Her back to me. Is everything okay? I asked. She didn't turn around. Her shoulders were tense. It's just, she said, her voice hesitant. Your bill. It's old, really old. What do you mean? I said, it's a 20. She turned around slowly, and she was holding the bill between her thumb and forefinger like it was something dirty. But it wasn't a 20 anymore. It was a piece of thick yellowed paper with a drawing on it, a drawing of me screaming in the tunnel. It was one of the drawings from the cabin. She looked from the drawing to my face, her eyes wide with confusion and then fear. I'm sorry, I said, backing away. I don't know what that is. I'll just go forget the coffee. I turned to leave, and I saw the old man in the corner. He had lowered his newspaper and he was staring at me. His face was pale, his mouth open in shock. The newspaper he was holding, the front page, had a large drawing on it, not a photo, a drawing of me running from the cabin. The headline read, "Local men still missing, search widens." I backed out of the coffee shop. The bell jingling again, a happy sound that now felt sinister. I got in my Jeep and sped away. Taste of fear bitter in my mouth. Even the money in my wallet was turning against me, becoming part of the nightmare. I drove through the picturesque streets of Seabrook. Now that I was looking for it, I could see the cracks in the perfect facade. A child on a bicycle rode past, and his face was a blank, smooth oval. No features. A woman walking a dog had a reflection in a store window. That was the thing from the tunnel, with long limbs and glassy eyes. The horror was here too. It was everywhere. It was in everything. I had to get out of the town. I followed the signs to the beach. Maybe the ocean would be too big, too powerful for them to corrupt. I parked in a lot overlooking the Pacific. The waves were crashing against the shore, a powerful rhythmic sound that felt ancient and clean. I walked down onto the sand, the wind whipping my hair, the salt spray stinging my face. I stood there for a long time, just watching the waves, feeling small and insignificant in the best possible way. The vastness of the ocean seemed to put things in perspective. My problems, my terror felt tiny compared to this. I started to walk along the water's edge, my shoes sinking into the wet sand. The beach was deserted, which was normal. For a cold morning in the off-season, I was alone with the gulls and the waves, and my own thoughts. For the first time in what felt like forever, I found a piece of driftwood and sat down, watching the horizon where the gray water met the gray sky. The tension began to bleed out of my shoulders. Maybe this was a place I could be safe. Maybe they couldn't reach me here. I saw something then out of the corner of my my eye. Further down the beach, a dark shape washed up on the sand. I stood up and walked towards it, my curiosity overpowering my caution. As I got closer, I saw it was a doll. Porcelain doll like the one from the trail. Its dress was soaked with seawater and tangled with kelp. Its hair was stringy with sand. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. No, not here, not this. So I turned to walk away. But then I saw another one a few yards away, another doll half buried in the sand. And another and another. I looked down the beach. As far as I could see, the shoreline was littered with them hundreds of porcelain dolls, all washed up by the tide, all with their heads turned towards me, their painted eyes staring, their little mouths fixed in tiny smiles. I started to run back towards the parking lot, my heart pounding again. The dolls were everywhere. I had to step over them, around them. Their tiny hands seemed to reach for my ankles. As I passed, I reached the stairs to the parking lot and scrambled up them, taking them two at a time. I burst into the parking lot and skidded to a halt. The parking lot was gone. In its place was a forest, the Spruce Railroad Trail to be exact. I was back. The ocean was gone, the sound of waves replaced by the silence of the trees. The Jeep was parked where I had left it, but now it was covered in a thick layer of moss and vines, like it had been sitting here for years. The door was open, and the seat was covered in a layer of damp leaves. I was back. I had never left. The whispers returned, then not from the trees, but from inside my own head. A soft, constant chorus. You can't escape your home, your home, your home. I fell to my knees on the gravel. The fight finally gone out of me. I was so tired, so broken. What was the point of running if it always ended here? If every road, every path just led me back to this trail, this forest, this hell? I looked up, and the first one was there, the calm version of me from the tunnel. He was standing next to the moss-covered Jeep, his hand resting on the hood like it was a beloved pet. He looked at me with those black eyes, his expression one of pity and understanding. See, he said, his voice gentle, it's easier if you just accept it. The fighting, the running, it only makes it hurt more. This is where you belong. This is where we all belong. We're a family here. He gestured, and the others began to step out. From behind the trees, dozens of them, hundreds of them, all the versions of me from the lodge, from the gas station, from the cabin. They all looked at me with the same peaceful acceptance. Come home, they whispered in unison, their voices blending into one. We've been waiting for you. The first one walked towards me and extended his hand again. This time I didn't pull away. I just looked at it. His hand, it looked like my hand. The same scars, the same fingernails, the same lines on the palm. I was so tired. I looked past him at the crowd of them. Their faces were all slightly different. Some older, some younger, some from different points in my life, but they were all me. They were all here, and they looked happy. They looked content. They looked like they had found a peace they had never known in my real life. The first one smiled, a warm, genuine smile. Take my hand, he said, in the pain, come home to us. I looked at his hand, and then I slowly reached out my own, my fingers trembling. My fingertips were inches from his when a sound tore through the oppressive silence of the forest. A real sound, a harsh mechanical sound. It was the blare of a car horn, long and insistent. It didn't belong here. It was alien and jarring. The first one flinched, his black eyes flickering with annoyance for a split second. crowd of us behind him also stirred their peaceful smiles, wavering. The horn blared again. And then again someone was leaning on it, a desperate, insistent sound that cut through the whispers in my head like a knife. I snatched my hand back and looked towards the source of the sound, the main road that led to the trailhead. There was a car there, an old beat-up sedan. I didn't recognize it, the driver's side door was open and a woman was standing next to it, one hand on the horn. She was frantically waving at me, her mouth moving like she was shouting. But I couldn't hear her over the horn and the whispers. She was real, she was solid, she was a person I didn't recognize, and she was here. She was trying to get my attention. First one grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron cold and impossibly strong. Ignore her, he hissed, his voice losing its smoothness, becoming a guttural snarl. She doesn't belong here. This is our place. She can't have you. The woman in the road took a step forward. She cupped her hands around her mouth, and this time I heard her voice. A thin, desperate thread of sound fighting against the forest silence. Run, she screamed, run to me now. I looked from her terrified face to the first one's angry, snarling face, and something in me broke. I couldn't do it. I couldn't join them. I ripped my arm out of his grasp, his fingers leaving cold burns on my skin, and I ran towards the road, towards the woman, towards the sound of the horn. First one howled in rage behind me, and a crowd of them erupted into a chorus of shrieks. Wails. I didn't look back, I just ran as fast as I could. My legs pumping, my lungs burning. The woman kept screaming, run, run, run. I burst out of the tree line and stumbled onto the asphalt of the road. The woman grabbed my arm, her grip warm and human. Come on, she yelled, pulling me towards the open car door. Get in. I fell into the passenger seat and she slammed the door shut and ran around to the driver's side. The things them were at the edge of the road. Now their faces contorted with fury, their black eyes glowing with hate, but they didn't step onto the asphalt. They stayed just inside the tree line, hissing and spitting like animals. The woman jumped into the driver's seat, slammed her door, and hit the locks. She threw the car into reverse and stomped on the accelerator. The tires squealed and we shot backwards down the road. She didn't turn around, she just drove in reverse. Watching the things in the rearview mirror, her face pale but determined, we sped backwards for what felt like an eternity until the trailhead was out of sight around a bend. Then she slammed on the brakes, spun the wheel, and screeched to a halt, facing the right direction. She put the car in drive and floored it. We sped down the road, away from the lake, away from the trail. I sat there in the passenger seat, trembling violently, trying to catch my breath. I looked over at her. She was a woman in her maybe late 40s with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes. She was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Who are you? I finally managed to choke out my voice. She glanced at me, her expression grim. My name is Anna. I've been looking for you for today, is how I asked. How did you find me? How do you know about any of this? She took a deep breath. My brother, she said. He went hiking on the Spruce Railroad Trail 5 years ago. He never came back. They found his car. They found some of his gear, but they never found him. I reported him missing. I gave them pictures. I begged them to keep looking, but after a few months, they closed the case. They said he must have fallen in the lake, but I knew that wasn't true. I knew because because a week after he disappeared, I got a postcard in the mail that had a picture of Lake Crescent on the front and on the back. It just said, "I'm home now, don't look for me." It was his handwriting, I know it was. But it didn't make any sense, so I started doing my own research. I talked to park rangers. I talked to locals, and I found out things about that trail, things they don't put in the guidebooks. People have been disappearing along that stretch of lake for over a century. Just hikers, homesteaders, loggers, fishermen, they vanish, and sometimes, years later, their families get a letter or a message, just like I did a message saying they're home. To stop looking, but I never stopped looking. I've been coming up here every few months for years, just driving the roads, hiking the trails, hoping to find a clue, hoping to find him. And then 2 days ago I saw the report about you. Hiker missing, same trail, same circumstances, and I knew it had happened again. So I came up here. I've been driving around non-stop looking for any sign of you, and then this morning I saw your Jeep parked at that rest stop. I saw you go into the bathroom, and I saw your reflection in the window. It wasn't you. It was something else, something wearing your face and smiling, and I knew I had to do something, so I followed you. I followed your Jeep. It was like you were driving in a trance. You didn't even seem to see me. And then you turned down that road to the trailhead, and you just drove into the trees and disappeared. The Jeep just vanished, so I parked on the road and I waited and I prayed. And then you were just there again, standing in the clearing with all those things. I knew I had to get your attention. I had to snap you out of it, so I laid on the horn, looked at her stunned, trying to process everything she was saying. "So it's real," I whispered. "It's not just in my head, it's really happening." "It's real," she said, her voice soft but sure. "It's real, and it's been happening for a long time." We drove in silence for a while. The landscape began to change, the dense forest giving way to clear cuts and then to farmland. We were getting further away. The feeling of being watched began to recede. The oppressive weight on my chest began to lift. I started to believe that maybe this was it. Maybe I was finally free. Anna seemed to relax to her grip on the steering wheel loosening. She turned on the radio and found a classic rock station playing a Tom Petty song. It sounded like the most beautiful music I had ever heard. "We're going to be okay," she said. "Going to go to the police in Forks, and we're going to tell them everything. We're going to make them listen this time." I nodded, feeling a fragile hope blossom in my chest. For the first time since I had pulled into that trailhead parking lot, we crested a hill, and the town of Forks was spread out in the valley below, a collection of lights. In the gathering dusk, a safe haven, and a smiled at me, a real, genuine smile. "See," she said, "almost home." Then the radio station dissolved into static, and a voice came through the speakers. It was my voice, but cold and dead. It said, "You can't bring him home, Anna. She's one of us." Anna's smile didn't falter. It just widened. Her eyes stayed on the road, but in the reflection of the windshield, I saw them, her pupils expand, flooding her irises with solid blackness. Whispered, scrambling away from her, pressing myself against the passenger door. Her head turned towards me, and she was still smiling, but it wasn't her smile anymore. It was their smile. "Welcome home, brother," she said in a chorus of whispers. And then she slammed her foot on the accelerator, and the car surged forward straight towards a concrete bridge abutment. The world erupted. erupted in a symphony of shattering glass and screaming metal. The force of the impact threw me forward, the seatbelt cutting into my chest like a knife, then snapping and sending me crashing into the dashboard, my head hitting the windshield. With a sickening crack, everything went black and silent and cold. I don't know how long I was out, seconds, minutes, hours, but I came to the smell of gasoline and burning rubber. My head was pounding, my vision was blurry, and everything hurt. I was lying half on the floor of the passenger side, half on the seat. Car was wrapped around the concrete bridge abutment, the front end completely crushed. Steam hissed from the ruptured radiator. The driver's seat was empty, the windshield on. That side was a spider web of cracks stained with a dark liquid. Anna was gone. I fumbled for the door handle, my fingers numb and clumsy. I managed to push the door open and I spilled out onto the cold, damp ground of the ditch beside the road. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the world spinning around me. I could see the lights of Forks twinkling in the distance, maybe a mile away, so close I could make it. I could walk there. I could get help. I pushed myself to my hands and knees and then to my feet, my body screaming in protest. I stumbled up the embankment onto the road. The night was quiet, no other cars, just me and the wreckage and the distant town lights. I started walking, my steps shuffling and unsteady, each one sending a jolt of pain through my ribs. My head throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I kept my eyes fixed on the lights. Don't look back, just keep walking, just get to town. The road was dark, lined with tall fir trees that blocked out the moonlight there. Shadows deep and impenetrable. I heard a sound, then from behind me a soft dragging sound, like something being pulled through the gravel on the road. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see. I forced myself to keep walking faster now, ignoring the pain. The dragging sound kept pace with me. Just behind me, just out of sight, then a voice spoke from the darkness to my right. It was Anna's voice, but broken and wet, like her lungs were filled with fluid. You should have come home when you had the chance, brother. It would have been easier. A figure detached itself from the shadows under the trees. It was Anna, but she was broken, her body bent at impossible angles, one leg dragged behind, leaving a furrow in the gravel. Her head was tilted too far to the side, her neck clearly snapped, but her eyes were open and black and fixed on me. She smiled, a rictus grin of pain and malice, and she took a jerky step towards me. I screamed and I ran towards the town lights, my injuries forgotten, my survival instinct taking over. The dragging sound sped up, keeping pace with me. I could hear her wet, ragged breathing. Right behind me, the lights of Forks got closer. I could see individual streets, individual houses. I was almost there. I burst into the outskirts of town. A residential street with neat little houses and picket fences. Lights were on in windows, TVs flickering behind curtains. Normal life, so close I could touch it. I ran towards the first house with a light on, a yellow house with a porch swing. I stumbled up the steps and hammered on the door with both fists. Please, I screamed. Please help me, someone help me. The door opened and a man stood there. He was in his pajamas, holding a newspaper. He looked normal, concerned. What's wrong, son? He asked. Are you okay? You're hurt. I fell into his house, grabbing his arm. It's behind me, I gasped. There's something behind me. Please call the police. He helped me inside. His Living room was warm and cozy, a fire crackling in the fireplace. A woman came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Oh my goodness," she said, "what happened, dear?" I tried to explain, the words tumbling out of me in a frantic jumble. The trail, the cabin, the things, the car crashed, the thing that was Anna following me. They listened patiently, their faces kind. The man nodded and said, "It's okay, son, you're safe now. You're home now." I stopped talking, the words dying in my throat. "Home now," the woman smiled at me, a warm, gentle smile, and her pupils expanded, flooding her eyes with blackness. The man's did too. They both smiled at me, their heads tilting in unison. "Welcome home," they said together. The front door swung open slowly, and Anna stood there in the doorway, her broken body framed by the night behind her. She dragged herself into the living room, her broken legs scraping across the nice hardwood floor. More people came out of the kitchen, an old woman, a teenage boy, a little girl. They all had black eyes. They all smiled at me. They were all here. The man put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, his skin cold. "We've been waiting for you," he said. "We saved you a seat by the fire." I looked where he was pointing at, the rocking chair by the fireplace, and it was rocking slowly back and forth, creak, creak, creak. And sitting on the seat was a porcelain doll dressed in a little lace dress, its head turned towards me, its painted blue eyes staring into mine, its hand raised pointing at the empty space beside it. I backed away from them towards the wall, my mind completely shattering. There was no escape, there was no safe place. The whole world was infected with them, the man, the woman, Anna. They all moved towards me, their arms outstretched, their faces filled with a terrible love. "Just rest now," they whispered in unison. "You're so tired, just come home and sleep." I felt my knees give out. I slid down the wall to the floor, the fight gone, completely gone. I was so tired, so broken, I closed my eyes, and the darkness that welcomed me was a comfort. I opened my eyes. I was sitting in the rocking chair by the fireplace. The doll was gone. The living room was empty. The fire had burned down to embers. The house was silent. I felt different. The pain was gone. The fear was gone. I felt peaceful. I felt calm. I felt whole. I stood up and walked to the window outside. The street was empty. The houses were dark, but I could see them now. I could see the truth. The world outside was just a facade, painted backdrop, and behind it was the forest, the eternal twilight of the Spruce Railroad Trail. The trees were waiting. The path was waiting. Was home. This was my home now, and I was not alone. I could feel them all around me. The others, the ones who had come before me, the ones who had tried to welcome me. I could feel Anna's brother here, a quiet presence in the corner of my mind. I could feel the homesteaders from a century ago, the loggers, the fishermen, all of them here. Together, a community, a family bound by this place, by this peace. I walked to the front door. Opened it. The street outside was gone, replaced by the gravel path of the trailhead. The tunnel was ahead of me, but it didn't look dark and threatening anymore. It looked like a gateway. It looked like home. The first one was there waiting for me at the entrance. He smiled, his warm, genuine smile. I smiled back. I understood now. I finally understood. He didn't need to speak. He just turned and walked into the tunnel, and I followed him without hesitation. The inside of the tunnel wasn't dark. It was filled with a soft golden light that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. The walls were no longer rough. They were smooth and covered in beautiful, intricate carvings that told the story of this place of all of us. The raspy breathing was gone, replaced by a soft, harmonious humming that seemed to come from the air itself. We walked together to the center of the tunnel, and the others were there, all of them waiting for me. They parted to make a path for me, and at the end of the path was the cabin, but it wasn't a dilapidated shack anymore. It was a beautiful lodge made of glowing wood and warm stone. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the smell was of baking bread and pine needles. The door was open and golden light spilled out onto the path. The first one gestured for me to go inside. I walked up the path and stepped through the door. The inside was vast and warm, a great hall filled with people laughing and talking, and they all turned to look at me as I entered, and they all had my face, but they were all different too. They were all the versions of me. I could have been the me who became a doctor, the me who got married, the me who traveled the world, the me who stayed in my hometown. They were all here, and they were all happy. They welcomed me with open arms. I felt a love and acceptance I had never known was possible. I saw Anna there till she was whole and healthy. Her eyes were her own, and they were full of joy. She hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for bringing my brother home." I didn't understand what she meant until I saw him standing by the fireplace. The man with her eyes, her smile, he nodded to me, his expression grateful. "I am home now. We are all home. This is where we belong. This is where the lost things go, the forgotten things. This is where we get to be the people we were always meant to be, without pain, without fear, without loneliness." Forever I sat down in a comfortable armchair by the fire, and a version of me from another life handed me a cup of hot cocoa. It tasted like childhood, like happiness, like peace. I looked around the room at all the faces, my faces. I knew every single story, every single heartache, every single joy. I was them and they were me, and we were all together. The whispers were still there, but they weren't whispers of menace anymore. They were whispers of love, of welcome, of home. They were the sound of this place, the sound of us. I have been here for a long time now, or maybe no time at all. Time doesn't work the same way here. I am happy, I am content, I am never alone. Sometimes I like to walk to the edge of our world, to the place where the forest meets the nothingness, and I watch the new ones arrive, the ones who are still fighting, still scared. I see them running through the trees, their faces pale with terror, and I want to tell them it's okay to stop running. It's okay to give, and the peace that waits for them is so much better than the fear they cling to, but they have to find their own way here. Like I did, like we all did. Sometimes I see someone who looks like they might make it, someone who might actually escape and find their way back to the world of pain and loneliness. When I see that, I and the others, we do what we must. We show them the signs, we guide them home. We can't let them leave. We love them too much to let them go back to that cold, lonely world. We are a family here. We take care of our own. So if you're reading this, if you're planning a hike on the Spruce Railroad Trail on a quiet afternoon, if you feel a prickle on the back of your neck, if you hear footsteps that aren't your own, just know that we are waiting for you. We